I have two of my live panelists here. I'm waiting for a third one, and I think we also have our online panelists lined up, also three, although I can't see them yet. If we have Tony Vidan here, maybe you can come and join us here at the podium. Not. Okay, I think we'll start in any case. So, yeah, thank you all for coming back. I hope you had a good coffee break, and I could hear already that there were plenty of discussions. And we were just realizing the big challenge with the hybrid event is that the people who are lined up on Zoom to speak, they are there and ready, but the coffee break is quite difficult to control. But I think we now have everybody back here, so we'll start again. So now what will happen is, so we'll turn now to a continuation of this panel, and the idea is to have some more comments on all the challenging ideas that we heard in the morning before the break. I will not even try at this moment to summarize those challenges. There were lots of them, but I know that the people on my panel have been listening and they are ready to now come in. And the idea is not, of course, for my panelists to comment on everything, but to try and pick out a few key points that, that they think is particularly relevant, or where their organization may have a particular response or a particular action that is relevant. So I'd like to start to invite Mr. Holger Schröder, who is head of unit at DG NEAR, the Western Balkan Regional Program and Economic Investment Plan unit. And Holger, I can see you very well on the screen, so the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Lotta, and it's a real pleasure for me to be with you. And maybe to first build, Lotta, on what you said at the beginning, this hybrid way of working is really the new normal for us. I think you know that the European Commission has stated an objective to become itself as an institution climate neutral. And that means, of course, also reduced number of missions. But I think, Lotta, you have well described also the benefits that increased number of participation via Zoom and other tools provides for us. I think it was a very, very rich discussion. So really big thanks to the three contributors. And I should maybe just outline what angle I'm coming from. Lotta has mentioned the title of my unit. So I come from it in particular from the Economic and Investment Plan. I will make a few remarks on that, and then comment perhaps in particular on the green agenda and also on social inclusion issues that were, I think, prominently came up in the previous session. But maybe just one comment from my side. Much has been said about the importance of civil society, and not much to be added there, but maybe to underline from my side really what I see as the ability also of civil society to accompany far-reaching changes in our civil society. We looked back, but looking forward, it's very much the green and digital transition also challenges to social inclusion. And I really think that civil society has to play an important role there. Civil society has perhaps shown much more than other actors in the crisis over the past years how resilient it is, and despite all the challenges that you have been facing. And one other remark, allow me as well, and this is in response also to the comments that Simonida made. I just would like to underline really the fact that the state of civil society and the status of enabling environment is, of course, and you know that, it's an important criteria that is looked into as part of the enlargement reports, and it's part of the issues that are assessed under what we call the fundamental cluster, under the revised enlargement methodology. And it's really from that angle that the fact that the CSO guidelines really provide very objective standards to measure the state of affairs is particularly important. I also would like to comment on the fear that was expressed, that will the Ukraine war now lead to less funding, be it for civil society or overall, will it draw away funding from the Western Balkans? I personally do not see this risk. I believe, on the contrary, I think the war in Ukraine has underlined how important the EU accession process is, in particular for the Western Balkans. And I think there is really the strategic interest, if anything, to try to accelerate the EU accession, the enlargement process, and to overcome the blockages that this process is facing. The financial framework also is in place, is stable for the current financial perspective until 2027. And it has been outlined, it comes with an increase of funding, both for civil society as well as for the Western Balkans overall. So I want to make a few comments about the EIP and its philosophy. Michela has given you the figures, the 9 billion and up to 30 billion. So why up to 30 billion? Because there is the hope that via financial guarantees, a lot of funding also will be channeled to the Western Balkans from the leveraged in terms of private sector investments. And the political motivation underlying that was really the realization that without economic and social progress, and without trying to not have a widening gap of living standards between the EU and the Western Balkans, but a narrowing one, it will be very difficult to ensure the success of the enlargement process. We know we have a lot of brain drain in the region, and the objective must be to reverse this trend and also to have people come back, because the economic and employment opportunities are there. And this was really I would say, the political underlying motivation to put a lot of attention on economic and social development under the instrument for pre-accession. And then I would like to underline in that regard, it's not only about infrastructure investments. They make very often the headline, be it on transport, on energy, but the economic and investment plan is really much broader than that. It is also about private sector development. It's about human resource development and innovation. One of the flagships, and I come back to that later on, deals with the youth guarantee. But it is also, it's a process that is not just about investments, but it's about coupling these investments with linking the region very closely to policies. So there are policy priorities, and one of them is, for example, the common regional market as a stepping stone really for joining in the future the single market of the EU. Much has been said about the importance now economic social development in the context of the pandemic or the Ukraine war. And really, if there's any challenge, it's much more about acceleration of the implementation because this support is very much needed. And that's my last word in general about the EIP. Also, I would like to emphasize that the EIP is really part and parcel of the enlargement process. I think nobody can be in doubt that the real boost that will come from private sector investments in the Western Balkans will only materialize if there is a strong confidence of private investors that the region is firmly anchored in the EU. And that means also that all the challenges with regard to the fundamentals, rule of law, and good governance are being convincingly addressed. And hence, it's really, these are two different sides of the same coin, the economic social development and rule of law and the fundamentals. So I would like to now come to first the green agenda and then social inclusion. First, for the green agenda, I think Ivana has set this out really in a very good and clear manner. Referring to the Green Deal on the side of the EU, and then the political commitment of the green agenda. And in the meantime, we have an action plan for the implementation of the green agenda that has been endorsed by the political leaders in the Western Balkans at the Brdo Summit. Now, all of this needs to be implemented. And the point I want to make, and this is a point I think that goes both for the EU as well as for the Western Balkans. It's an enormous challenge. It's a comprehensive and far-reaching process of political, economic, and social change. And I'm personally very proud that the von der Leyen Commission has really put the Green Deal and the digital transition at the core of her mandate in the Commission. And but I'm fully aware that in a way this transformation can only succeed if the population is fully carrying this process. I'm sitting here at the moment in my office in Brussels, and before the pandemic, every Friday I could see the Fridays for Future demonstrations. And this is really what is needed because it's about behavioral change as well, and the willingness to undertake these changes. So the political commitments that have been taken by the governments, that they are really important, but I think now is the time to monitor the implementation of these commitments, and Ivana has set out the 5 pillars, and I would say to try to foster and generate support in society overall, because only then it can succeed. I admit there was a fear how the war in Ukraine would play out. I've been made a tour through the region over the past weeks and months, and we have discussed also energy transition. And certainly some changes are in the short term are more difficult, but I also see that there is a realization, a full realization. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I think there's a full realization as well that there is really no alternative for when it comes to the green transition, the reinforcement, strengthening of energy efficiency, and the increased use of renewable energies. And what we are doing on our side, we are accelerating our funding for this change, and we are also putting additional resources that support the green transition in sectors such as energy, but also transport. And of course, the private sector has an important role to play here as well. So I would like to really underline the important role that civil society organizations need to play on this. So it's not a coincidence why we have put this topic on the agenda tomorrow. We are soon, next week, also kicking off an important project which is called EU for Green. That is a 4-year project that will work with the governments in the region to assist them to live up to the political commitments that have been taken for the implementation of the Green Agenda. Close cooperation on this topic with the Regional Cooperation Council. And I think there's really the need to step up the dialogue with civil society on this. I mean, this event is a step for it, but in the next event in Budva, the kickoff for EU for Green. And I'm convinced that the RCC, and I think the RCCs in the room will also regular hold forums with civil society on this this particular topic. Then maybe the last point under the topic green agenda, but that's a transition already to the social inclusion, are the remarks that you made on just transition. And in particular, the challenges that coal regions are facing, that for the countries having to decarbonize. And here, of course, the answer is very much in the on the employment side, on the social side. So to really work with those who need new skills and also, and that's the transition now to my next topic, address issues such as energy poverty that were mentioned by Danilo, for example. So the rest of my remarks really concern social inclusion and protection, and also human capital development. And there, I think it's fair to say that governments throughout the EU are concerned about the impact that inflation and the spike in energy and food prices have, in particular, on the less well-off in society. And they are introducing measures to tackle that. And the same is true in the Western Balkans. But I want to maybe pick up on what Danilo said here. I think it's very much the pandemic also, and now also the war, is very much exposing systemic weaknesses in the social inclusion and protection systems that were there before. And I would say in particular in the Western Balkans. We had recently a study of the World Bank that has demonstrated that whereas there is not so little social spending does not reach really those who need it most. So it's not sufficiently poverty targeted in the Western Balkans. We also have another topic with regard to education and employment. We have very high rates in the region of youth who are not in employment, education, or training, much higher than in the EU, and in particular under vulnerable groups. These rates are very, very high. So we really need systemic change, and we need projects under the instrument for pre-accession, and I would say in particular under the national IPA programs that work with the governments to bring about changes here. Because I think part of the answer will really lie here. When it comes to the EIP and to the investment projects, I think we also need to carefully see how we can mainstream the concerns of the more vulnerable groups in society. And there are some good approaches and some good thinking on this. There are, for example, microcredit schemes to marginalized communities. There is what is called impact finance that really measures also the impact of investments with regard to the positive change that they are bringing about. When it comes to the digital transition, we are very well aware that there is also, I would say, a danger of an increase of a digital divide. So we need to target our investments really in a good manner to avoid that, and have the interests of those in mind that have less access to digital tools. And I think what was done during the pandemic was really a good example of how to go forward. Then I mentioned already the youth guarantee, and this is one of the flagships, so one of the key projects under the economic and investment plan. And the ambition here is to avoid that youth between 15 and 29 will end up on the street, either because they don't find a job after their education comes to an end, or they get unemployed. So really to try to avoid unemployment, that requires really cooperation of different players, and is a far-reaching, ambitious process that is underway in the EU. And again, the EIP also tries to support similar processes in the Western Balkans. So in all of that, again, civil society, I would say, has played a very important role over the past 2 years, working hand in hand with government. But I think this will become even an increasing focus to work in this area. And I can only back the comments that were made about the importance of civil society to work also at local level. I think many of you, and I think we have also panels from UNDP, are aware of the Reload program that tries to foster precisely this, to bring really authorities at local level together with civil society organizations. So, and last sentence, and then I'm really stopping, that is just to pick up on what Michaela said about the introductory remarks about the importance of young people. I'm really convinced that when it comes to these ambitious transitions, green agenda, digital agenda, but also social inclusion, that really the involvement of young people is really crucial. And I think it's important for civil society to reflect on that. I think we have some good initiatives going on. I mentioned the Reload program already, but we have the Youth Lab, we have RICO that puts in particular the angle on the involvement of young people. So I apologize. I've been perhaps a bit long. Thank you, Lotta. Back to you.
Thank you very much. I have, thank you for spelling out a bit more around the EIP and the green agenda. And I have added some of these challenges to my list, my summary list here, which I think is actually, I added very much the youth perspective. I think we need to think about more the brain drain, and also this whole chapter of confidence of private investment, which is very much linked to rule of law and good governance in general. So thank you very much for that. My next speaker is also from the European Commission. She works in DG Just and Consumers Director General. Her name is Elica Mincheva. She is in the international team there. And Elica, I'm very grateful that you're here with us. I know you've had some health issues this week, and it's a sign of your true commitment that you're still on your 2 feet and with us. So thanks very much. I'll give you the floor straight away. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lotte. And just to check that you can hear me well.
It is good. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And indeed, it is a pleasure to be joining you today, be it virtually, but now I think by now we have all gotten in the habit of connecting virtually. So I hope we can make the most of it. Let me make it clear from the beginning that in DG Justice, we acknowledge very strongly the role of civil society organizations throughout all our different policies, be it the work that we're doing on democracy, disinformation, fighting disinformation, the rule of law, fundamental rights, equality. In all of these areas, civil society has a crucial role to play. It is essential for the good functioning of democracy, for the promotion of a rule of law culture and respect for fundamental rights. And for us, CSOs are definitely essential watchdogs that can keep governments to account and that can signal to us early on threats to the rule of law, to democracy, to fundamental rights. In the enlargement context, I think that civil society organizations have an even more important role to play, because I think personally, in my view, but I probably a lot of my colleagues would agree, and a lot of you around the table, there can be no sustainable transformation or change or reform without it being deeply ingrained, deeply rooted in society. And here the role of civil society organizations is crucial. There was a recent report by the European Court of Auditors assessing EU support for the rule of law in the context of enlargement, but specifically, it was focusing specifically on the Western Balkans. And the key conclusion of that report was that a main obstacle to tangible, meaningful, sustainable progress on the rule of law in the region is lack of political will. And of course, here in the Commission and the Council, all of the EU institutions, we can push as much as possible for progress and try to deliver strong messages where needed, and take consequences of lack of reform. But at the same time, a very important stimulus for political will is society demanding change, demanding reforms. And here, civil society is definitely a key actor and a key partner for us. You know very well that we take a lot of input from civil society organizations in the preparation of the enlargement reports, the annual enlargement reports. We try to meet with all relevant civil society organizations in preparation of subcommittees in the area of justice and home affairs. And our partnership with you is really crucial. And where it was mentioned earlier that sometimes involvement of civil society in decision making in the region can be a matter of checking or ticking boxes, that should not be the case. And whenever that is the case, it would be important to signal it to us. One of the key comments that we always deliver in, when we are consulted on strategies, draft legislation, is to which extent all the relevant stakeholders have been involved in the process of preparing any important measures, policy measures, legislative measures. And it is essential for us that this does take place and that it is a substantial, not just a formal process. Now, I will move on a bit to my presentation. I will focus on a number of initiatives that the EU has taken across the areas that I mentioned to strengthen democracies in the EU, to make them more resilient to the challenges of the digital age, and to strengthen the rule of law, to tackle challenges to fundamental rights. And these challenges that I'm mentioning are certainly very much common. They don't stop at the borders of the EU, and they're very much shared with our enlargement partners. So let me first begin with the European Democracy Action Plan. It was adopted in December 2020. Excuse me if I have to cough every once in a while. Sorry. It was adopted in December 2020, and it covers a number of measures to strengthen democracies and enable a high-quality democratic political discourse. The measures that are foreseen under the action plan include measures to strengthen specifically media freedom and pluralism, to fight against disinformation, and to ensure free and fair elections. It was mentioned earlier, but the Commission has been active as regards SLAP, the so-called SLAP, strategic lawsuits against public participation. Specifically on the 27th of April this year, the Commission adopted a package of measures, legislative measures, and a recommendation to the member states to address such strategic lawsuits against public participation. And the measures are a mix of legislation and recommendations to equip journalists and human rights defenders who are targets of SLAP with tools to fight back against abusive lawsuits. They include procedural measures in the context of court proceedings where judges can dismiss more easily, for instance, such lawsuits. As regards free and fair elections, the Commission has adopted a proposal for a regulation on the transparency and targeting of political advertising in November 2021. It provides for a high standard of transparency for political advertising and boosts the protection of individuals' personal data when it is used in the targeting and amplification of such messages. The aim of this transparency proposal is to ensure that people can easily distinguish when they are looking at paid political content, who has paid for it, how much, and what micro-targeting criteria have been used. Also, in the context of the Democracy Action Plan, a joint mechanism on election resilience has been provided at the disposal of the member states as a capacity building tool to support the exchange of expertise in areas such as disinformation, cybersecurity, and online forensics. Moving on to our work on the rule of law. As you are probably aware, the Commission disposes of, or the EU disposes of a toolbox that can, of different instruments that can be used in order to address challenges to the rule of law in the member states. So these instruments include, data measurement tools such as the Justice Scoreboard that can indicate to which extent the justice systems of the member states are performing well. These tools include also the rule of law mechanism, the European semester recommendations, the infringements, and the Article 7 procedure, whereby the Council can suspend certain rights of EU membership for member states that are infringing on the rule of law. As of 2020, the rule of law toolbox includes the annual rule of law report. It seeks to reflect the situation on the rule of law in the member states. So it specifically analyzes the situation as regards independence of the judiciary, fight against corruption, media freedom, and institutional checks and balances. And in this area, the aim of the report is to detect potential challenges to the rule of law from emerging or deepening, and to allow for a discussion and exchange among the member states as to how such challenges can be tackled. Another goal of the report is to ensure that we promote and we develop a rule of law culture within the Union through dialogue and exchange of information. And you can see that there are some similarities between these rule of law reports for the EU27 and the annual reports in the context of enlargement. Specifically, as of this year, the EU27 rule of law reports will also include recommendations to the member states as to how they can tackle challenges to the rule of law in the areas that are covered. And let me also underline, in this context, the contributions of civil society are crucial. We receive input from civil society organizations in the preparation of these reports. When the country visits are, because essentially the Commission also then meets with the member states to discuss the conclusions of these reports. So when we do country visits, we also try to meet with civil society organizations. And in the report itself, whenever the Commission also monitors legislative developments at national level that may have an impact on civil society organizations, and they can be signaled and discussed with the member states. Moving on then to fundamental rights. This is a very vast area, and I will try to touch briefly upon it because I could go on for a very long time.
I will ask you to keep it just, it's super interesting, but I think we need to round up a little bit. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. As you may be aware, the Commission has also adopted a strategy to strengthen the application of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. And in this context, one of the pillars of this strategy is empowering civil society. And then specifically, there is an annual report on the implementation of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. And this year's report will actually focus on the civic space and its role in protecting and promoting the fundamental rights under the Charter. And it will focus on concrete examples that explain the role of civil society organizations and human rights defenders in ensuring the effective implementation of the Charter. Very briefly on equality, non-discrimination, and anti-racism, it is a big portfolio. It has become a very big and visible portfolio. As regards gender equality, the objectives in this area are set by the Gender Equality Strategy, and further to the strategy, we have already been working on a number of legislative measures. For instance, very recently in March of this year, the Commission adopted a proposal for a directive on violence against women and domestic violence. There are discussions ongoing at legislative level as regards the directive on gender balance on corporate boards. As regards pay transparency, legislative negotiations are also advancing on the proposal for a directive to strengthen the application of the principle of equal pay for equal work or work of equal value between men and women. The work-life balance directive is in the process of being transposed by the member states. And then more generally on anti-discrimination, we have also adopted a number of strategies specifically targeting different areas of anti-discrimination. So the EU Anti-Racism Action Plan, the strategy on combating anti-Semitism, the EU Roma Strategic Framework for Equality, Inclusion and Participation, the LGBTIQ Equality Strategy, and we are soon to adopt a legislative proposal setting minimum standards for binding standards on equality bodies. The aim is to adopt the proposal by September of this year. And on hate speech and hate crime, the Commission has proposed to the Council to add hate crime and hate speech to the EU crimes listed, referred to in Article 83 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the EU. And final word, just to signal that an additional way for us to support civil society organizations is through funding. In addition to the IPA funding, also the CERV programs, Citizens Equality, Rights and Values program, that is managed by DG Justice, is open to applications from civil society organizations in these areas. And as you may be aware, also our enlargement partners can apply to participate in the Justice and the CERV program, and that would enable also civil society organizations from the region to apply for projects under the program. And this is all from me, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think it is actually extremely rich, all these efforts that are going on. And I hope that people here are familiarized with that and following, because I think it's quite useful. And we've certainly taken inspiration from that as well when we've been working on the guidelines. We'll move straight on to our next speaker. That's Kalinka Gabar, from who's State Advisor for the General Secretariat of the Government of North Macedonia. I'm very happy to have you here. And if you'd like to give some comments on this huge agenda that we're now dealing with, but please focus on some of the elements.
I will always get the challenging things on this conference as well. Thank you again for having me and for inviting me. I must admit I never mastered the art of Zoom conferencing, so I'm super happy we are back to events and conferences with physical presence. Before trying to, I cannot summarize, I mean, this would be impossible for anybody to do, I guess. What was said earlier by all the distinguished speakers before, I would just like to set the scene of my own, maybe, so you know where I come from. I always want to present myself as a civil society gal that somehow ended up in government. So I'm always, you know, wearing these two hats, a bit of, I said earlier to somebody in the room, I have this feeling of being a bit schizophrenic, because I take a lot of my civil society experience with me in government, but also try in the discussions with civil society representatives to also give the government perspective, because I will never, ever accept that these are on the two polar opposites, but more of the two sides of one coin. And I really want to approach this issue in this way. I must admit, I was at the last TASCO meeting in a different capacity in, when was it, early January, I believe, 2020, before the COVID outbreak happened. I must admit that there is the trust gap between government and civil society seems to have increased. which is normal, perhaps, because of all the different crises that have happened. But I really want us to think, irrespective of where everybody in this room stands, of how we can bridge this gap, make this gap narrower. That's one point on the type of general remark. And also another, conferences like this are always challenging when we have such a diverse audience and try to tackle issues in 7 different countries of the region, which have different contexts, different environments. It's really hard to find something which is underpins them. Usually when we do that, it's the least common denominator, which always gives a negative outlook maybe on things. I think that good things have also happened. And we should be true to ourselves, both nationally, but also when we think about the state of civil society and the environment that civil society operates in, to try and pinpoint those positive things that have sprang out from this crisis. And now this is a transition to my second point in trying to summarize what was said before. COVID and now the aggression of Russia on Ukraine are, of course, crises that tectonically change the environment we operate in, but they should also be perceived as challenges. We should maybe perceive them more as challenges that give us an opportunity to look ahead. And I'm maybe perhaps going to hijack a bit of the audience and the floor here to speak briefly about what happened in North Macedonia. But I think this goes without saying, maybe for all the other national contexts, especially as far as COVID is concerned. I think that one thing that we rarely speak about is how what happened under COVID and the exposing of these systemic and endemic weaknesses of the societies usually actually helped us grow. Because what happened in North Macedonia, for example, when COVID hit, nobody was prepared. And I'm going to be completely honest, the state was not prepared. But through the efforts and the pressures and the advocacy and the lobbying of civil society organizations that deal with very specific target groups, and they know how to address their needs in such crisis times, the country and the institutions and the authorities slowly picked up. And then if you look at how the institutions responded in the early days of the crisis, and then afterwards, you can really see this change that through the efforts of civil society organizations and through their advocacy, the national authorities also changed their approach to dealing with the crisis. I'm not saying it's perfect, but what I want to point out is that now we have some understanding of how not to repeat certain mistakes in the future, because pandemia or crisis like this will happen, and we need to get prepared both on the side on civil society and on the side of national authorities, because this is the only way that we can build resilience. Another point that I would like to make in this regard is, for example, on how this country tackles fake news and disinformation. This issue in the past has been more prominently put on the agenda by civil society organizations. Now that we're dealing with the crisis, with the war in Ukraine, and the way that we see penetration of fake news and disinformation sites in our public space, the government response relies mostly on the analysis that was made by civil society organizations. And this is where I see that the policy making in this area will really take on board the recommendations that civil society organizations have put forth. Another issue that was touched by the previous speakers is how, and I'm moving to my next point, is how the stalled EU integration process is reflected on all of society. Unfortunately, I must fully agree with a number of speakers that spoke before me that this stalled integration process has eroded not only the credibility of the EU in the region, for where we stand in North Macedonia, it has eroded it completely and entirely. Just a small footnote, we have never fell below 75% of trust and positive opinion on the EU before. Now it's in the high 40s. The EU is not perceived as a credible and trustworthy partner. And this erosion of credibility has spilled over the entire the society as a whole. But it has not only eroded the credibility of the EU, it has also eroded the credibility of government, because all, as the saying goes, all eggs were put in one basket, which is, we can discuss whether this is a good strategy or tactics. I have my personal opinion on that. Don't quote me. But it has also eroded or negatively affected the credibility of EU enthusiasts in the civil society sector. So this is a lose-lose situation that we have to deal with and we have to work on. So all the good projects and activities and measures that are foreseen in the economic and investment plan, in what the lady from DG just spoke about, they do not really take hold in society because this credibility has been eroded. And if we want to move forward, and if you want to deal with the future crises that are going to befall upon us, then it will be easier if North Macedonia and the region was engaged in a structured dialogue through negotiations that will bring society forward as well. The last point I want to make is maybe briefly of national context for North Macedonia. It was already stated that we have a new strategy for cooperation, which is supposed to improve and upgrade the institutional, legal, and financial framework for the work of civil society organization. I'm very happy that we have a very strong unit for cooperation with NGOs in the General Secretariat of the government, who are true and dedicated. Maybe perhaps there are also civil society gals and guys there as well, who are champions of the strife of civil society and the creation of an enabling environment there. Michaela mentioned earlier, while we were programming, in my previous life, I was State Secretary for European Affairs, but when we were reprogramming IPA 2 to address the COVID needs, and then programming IPA 3, we engaged civil society through a structured dialogue. And it is a process. It is a process of building trust between government and civil society, but I do believe that the action documents that were presented were adopted in a very inclusive and participatory and engaging manner. There are problems, of course, but as it said, it takes two to tango. What I would like to maybe advocate as a last point, and trying to bridge this gap again that I mentioned earlier in my address. There are civil society champions in the administration, and sometimes in the public administration, and sometimes they'll also need the support of civil society players in order for that advocacy to come forward. So I would really call on everybody to use this opportunity that we have at hand in order to advance the whole environment forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, it's a bit of a challenge to be the timekeeper here because there's so much really interesting information coming through. We also wanted to have some EU-based civil society organizations commenting here, just to see what kind of reflections they may have to share with their peers here in the region. So I have first online Isabella Mikalachev from the Ergo Network, which you might know brings together more than 30 Roma and pro-Roma organizations from all over Europe. And I am sorry to do this, but I will ask you to be short. And I realize it's actually very difficult for you to see my body language from here. So, but please stick to, maybe if you can do 7 minutes, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And of course, I will try to be short. I was already notified of the time constraints. Thank you very much for inviting the Ergo Network to address this panel on challenges and opportunities for civil society in the Western Balkans. We would also like to thank you for inviting one of our partners in Albania, the Roma Active Albania, to speak, who is speaking tomorrow on the human rights situation and community resilience. And I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I would like to greet everyone who attends both in Skopje and online. I have been asked to talk more specifically on the main challenges for Roma in the region, the role of a network of civil society NGOs like Ergo to respond to these challenges, the experiences that we can offer to other civil society and networks on how to influence EU policy, and what we would like to see from EU policymakers and governments. So maybe on the last one, I will try to make it shorter. Hopefully, I will also manage to address some of the points that have been already raised by the previous speakers. And so I would like to say that across the Western Balkans and Turkey, the situation of most Roma communities remains unfortunately very challenging and serious, despite the many positive efforts that we could see and witness both by the EU and international institutions, but also by governments and civil societies. Many Roma in the Western Balkans and Turkey are very often the victims of racism, discrimination, and social exclusion and poverty. And Roma communities often lack still adequate access to healthcare, education, housing, and employment, including civil documentation. And we have also examples, particularly when it comes to education, of situations of segregation. The coronavirus pandemic, because many of you have already mentioned this, when it comes to Roma, has deeply affected the daily life of Roma living in marginalized communities and suffering from social exclusion and poverty. The data that we have collected through our members in the region confirm that marginalized Roma were amongst the most affected and impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, mainly to the previous devastating living conditions and exclusion triggered by widespread anti-Gypsyism. During the lockdown, families lost their job because they couldn't go out to perform the daily income generating activities. And as a result, many Roma families had difficulties to pay their bills. Children had also had to go to school online, and most of them didn't have access to desktop or laptops or had limited internet data. And some have failed even to pass the school year. Throughout the region, during the crisis, there was an increase of anti-Gypsyist hate speech and hate crime towards the Roma community, resulting at times in police brutality and hate crime incidents. Roma civil society organizations were the first and the most reliable supporters of Roma communities in difficult situations during the COVID-19 crisis, by turning into first aid providers of humanitarian aid on a regular basis, and thus filling the gap left by local and government authorities. This had an impact on the NGO daily operations, while it has actually taught NGOs to adapt and recreate in a way the profile that they used to have as watchdog NGOs. The Russia's war in Ukraine led to a general sense of instability, and this has been already mentioned by previous speakers, especially in the region with the divide between pro-Western and pro-Russian voices across the Balkans. The increase in energy and gas prices across Europe have obviously affected the socioeconomic situation in the Western Balkans, affecting the most marginalized, such as the Roma. Ergo, it has been already mentioned by the moderator, we are a grassroots Roma organizations network based in Brussels with around 30 member NGOs throughout more than 20 EU member states, Western Balkans and Turkey. Our work focuses on combating anti-Gypsyism and Roma poverty, strengthening the Roma civil society participation in decision-making, and also working with institutions on effective social inclusion and anti-discrimination policies, standards, and funds for Roma. Our work in the region to date has been to empower its Roma and pro-Roma member organizations and invest in solid capacity building programs and activities for civil society tailored to NGOs' needs and the country situation in its approach to Roma, but also tailored to the actual challenges of the Roma communities, as well as building strong ties and partnerships with key stakeholders addressing equality and social inclusion concerns, including building solidarity with other NGOs in the field of defending other vulnerable groups. More specifically, in working with our members and Roma NGOs, our support has included throughout the years providing small grants or applying jointly for funds, training and workshops, joint field trips, needs assessment of community and NGO needs, guidelines and transfer of knowledge about institutions, including facilitating access of Roma local NGOs to institutions and working together on defining strategic priorities and advocacy strategies. Mentorship in monitoring and advocacy. An important part of the joint work with our members was to contribute to the national Roma action plans and strategies in line with the EU Roma frameworks, both in the design, implementation and monitoring, and ensuring that key strategic priorities are reflected inside, particularly on the fight against anti-Gypsyism. However, we see that more needs to be done in order to strengthen the capacities of Roma NGOs in the Western Balkans to engage more effectively in policy making, implementation, and monitoring at regional and national level. Currently, only a few Roma NGOs are involved in policy making processes at country level. Many have very basic technical and management capacities and little experience in managing projects or monitoring local policies. This is coupled also with the general difficulties for NGOs to attract EU funding because of challenges in financial and reporting requirements. We also witness Roma NGOs having difficulties to do their work as watchdogs because of threats and intimidation. So through the capacity building work that Ergo is doing with its members, we also aim to create a rolling effect where our members' improved skills and knowledge are being passed on to other NGOs in an effort to widen the number of strong watchdog NGOs on national and local level, including to build national coalitions of NGOs, particularly when it comes to the monitoring of the national Roma strategies, following the model of the Roma Civil Monitoring Program implemented in the EU member states by Ergo together with a consortium of organizations. We also try to fundraise together with our members as a way to help increase resources and capacities for some of them. Not ultimately, we try to ease the burden of our members and local Roma NGOs, especially on sensitive topics.
Isabella, I'm sorry, I need to soon cut you because we have.
Yeah, I'm just gonna end. I have to end the phrase where we try to echo their concerns directly with EU institutions or joining their advocacy at national level. And I would just end by saying that we are amongst the very few networks based in Brussels that we are trying to maintain a strong focus on Western Balkans and Turkey, as a way to help advance Roma inclusion and equality and provide support of Roma NGOs in the region. I have to stop, but I would just make a remark that I was the only one to be limited in terms of time. And as civil society, I thought it was important to provide also input on some of the lessons learned, but I will have to stop here. And of course, if there are questions, I can provide more input. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think maybe we've been a bit overambitious with having so many speakers, because we think there's so much room for dialogue. In any case, I just wanted to come in there and say, in our support to civil society in the region, especially these regional networks that we've set up, we always have this policy of having, as you all know, this main applicant being from the region, and we've done that because we think that these activities should be run from the region, and they should sort of be owned from the civil society in the region. But I think it's also quite interesting to try to explore how can one build sort of interesting cooperation with civil society organizations in the EU member states, and that was a bit the purpose of bringing more the EU CSOs on board here. I'll give the floor now to Tony to see what comments you might have, and especially perhaps on that point, how do you think there could be because I think we've outlined pretty well the challenges, they're quite shared, I think, and understood, and of course you're welcome to comment on that as well, but especially if you have something on the cooperation between the CSOs in the EU and outside and here.
Thank you. No, you will not distract me to add the pile of problems and descriptions of the problems, but I will, of course, try to say a little bit on that, how European level NGOs can cooperate. But let me first clarify this. I wouldn't dare to speak about the situation in Western Balkan countries. I will speak from the experience of Croatia. I'm from Zagreb, Croatia, all my life. I'm an activist there, working on environment and development of that imaginary friend of us, which we called strong and vibrant civil society. So I'm speaking about experience from Croatia. I wouldn't dare to say something critical or even insulting about any other country in the region. I'm working on energy all my life, so I will try to touch a little bit what is happening or what is new reality in the field of energy, because I, of course, think it's the most important sector. And then why I'm here is this connection, European to regional civil society. So to add a pile of problems in Croatia, but I also believe in a region, I will tell you my list of problems which were not sufficiently mentioned until now. So my list is corruption, 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 corruption and addiction to fossil fuels. Corruption, 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 corruption and addiction to fossil fuels. Now, from the perspective of Croatia and Zagreb, Zagreb had earthquake 2 years ago. We got a pile of money from European Solidarity Fund. We still didn't spend the money. It's blocked because of political dysfunctionality of the society. In my opinion, and in the opinion of many analytical people from civil society, thanks to the corruption. So it's very questionable. Is Europe succeeding to solve any problem just by throwing more money on it? If the receiving end, in my case, Zagreb, Croatia, is actually to a large extent a dysfunctional society which is misusing most of the funds. We will spend large number or large percentage of the funds, for example, for renewables, shift in renewables, but in a corrupt way. We will create new elite which will privatize local resources for long term and generate undemocratic and not productive relations in a society for a long term. So if there is some sort of message which I need to say at this short presentation, I would expect that European institutions, if they are increasing funding for any problem in any region, proportionally, there should be an increase in independent evaluation and funding for real independent actors which are caring about the official aims of that support which is to be given. That's about this. Energy. I think we are actually in a peak of the crisis, and I think that what is happening in Ukraine is geopolitical response to European Green Deal. When Europe finally spell out as official policy that we will stop buying fossil fuels, this is a part of the reaction to that political fact. And I think we will be surprised, or many people will be surprised, how this crisis will actually contribute to the acceleration to the transition to renewables. But all our hopes that our renewable society of future will be happy, democratic, decentralized, loving everybody society, I'm afraid will not materialize. I think that a large part of that transition will be grabbed by, bad people who will continue kind of business as usual type of economy which we are suffering, well, all our lives. But there is a hope for the region because technologies really became so cheap that many households, small businesses will be able to shift to local renewables, and hopefully that will give us some sort of, well, environmentally less harmful situation, and hopefully some basic preconditions for development on a local level and some sort of normalization. In the terms of cooperation with European civil society, I will also kind of try to think that actually Balkan civil society will be in a very high demand in a huge part of Europe 5 or 10 years from now, because Europe is coming to Balkan, not Balkan coming to Europe. When you look at the political processes which we are now witnessing in a huge part of the member states, we are having serious problem in democratic standards and role of civil society going down in many member states. And maybe we will be consultants of the future, teaching our friends in the civil society of large part of member states how to function and achieve their goals in a not so democratic and dysfunctional society, which we are, I think, really skillful. So yes, there is a need for cooperation, but we need to disengage from the discourse that European civil society will help us. They are nice people, they love to cooperate, there is a lot of solidarity, but we know it. There is no such thing as a free lunch, blah, 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 in an NGO cooperation. So if you approach, and there is a lot of kind of politeness on a side of civil society from the Western Balkan in terms of, we don't want to bother, we are asking for help, so we will wait that our, European partners, which are big and smart, approach us for the cooperation. Go for it, demand cooperation, but treat it as a cooperation, not as a help. There is a lot of expertise in Brussels, but Brussels is kind of dark, black hole, which is consuming all those thousands of smart and good people in Brussels, kind of doing their Brussels thing, which is completely, disconnected with the rest of the Europe, but demand cooperation. And there is a huge, actually, field of potential use, kind of innovative way. We are locked down very much in all this dialogue with Europe, with the Commission. And I think Commission likes that. It is basically civil society commission dialogue. I tell you, go to the parliament. Talk with the parliament what Commission is telling you. That is a very productive avenue of your future activities and cooperation with European society. So there is a lot of, and other thing which local governments. I mean, I know in Croatia, 90% of the local mayors or however you call them are, I mean, they are open for cooperation like this brick wall here. But things are a little bit changing because people are really getting, hungry. So I think there is a great cooperation a great change in the cooperation with the local governments to stop privatization of local natural resources by crooks, and hopefully we can do something about that in the future more than until now. Thank you. I crossed the time, probably. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think you woke us up there, and I've noted your long list to our list, so which is very important. And I think there were some important ideas there on the cooperation as well between civil society. Last but not least, we have Sanja Vujanovic from the UNDP here, and we thought it was interesting to have you here because you're very active with lots of work on both the green agenda and on the socioeconomic aspects. So we wanted to have your views as well, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Great to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm unfortunately the one standing between you and lunch, so I'll try to make it short and sweet. When a lot of things are said, I try to visualize stuff because that's the only way I can remember. So actually, I would do that for you today. When people were talking about all of these challenges that we are facing, all the numerous crises that we are facing, we have faced, and we will be facing in the future, I remembered a caricature that I've seen in some of the international newspapers in which there was a person and they were looking at the waves. The first wave was COVID, which was very obvious right in front of their face. The next wave was the socioeconomic crisis, which was a bit higher, but if you look like this, you can see it. And then the biggest one, which was like tsunami, was the climate change. So I think this is a good representation of a lot of the things that we've heard today. It's definitely not a summary. I'm not claiming that it's that, but it's something that we need to keep in mind when we are thinking about the challenges that we are facing today. It's, things are lined up, and what is closest to you may be the most urgent, but it may not be the biggest challenge that you are facing. So in the context of that, I would like to talk about 3 issues, which are for me, I wouldn't say lessons learned, but something that has clearly came up, and that we in UNDP are looking at when we are designing future interventions, which is the interconnectedness of all the issues, then its vulnerabilities and rising inequalities, and then its urgency versus the long term. And I'm going to give you just a few examples so that you can relate, and then I'm going to hopefully in a very short time connect it also to the future, both for interventions of UNDP, but I think it's very applicable for the civil society as well. So when we are talking about interconnectedness, we are actually talking about COVID being the health crisis, but actually very quickly becoming a socioeconomic one, having impact on how people behave, how their quality of living, democracy, women in terms of the unequal share of the work burden at home when there was a lockdown. So all of these are socioeconomic issues. So one issue is never the one. It always connects to numerous other issues. Then we have all of these things piled up together. We have socioeconomic impacts that we are feeling today. So when you add Ukraine crisis to that, then we have the inflation that we are all talking about, the rise in prices, only basic, food, milk, bread, they rise between 15 to 40%. And the overall increase was 12% only in May, recorded by the Statistical Office. So we are talking about huge issues that will impact your everyday life. And this is all because things are interconnected. And then we are talking about climate change, which is affecting some countries more, but will be affecting all of us very shortly in terms of the incidents, heat, pollution, all of it, you know, piled up coming together. So how does this affect the way the UNDP acts and the civil society should act? And I'm only going to talk about 3 factors in the interest of time. I think as all these issues are interconnected, CSOs and UNDP need to think about how do we approach them in the integrated manner? How we make sure that we skill people so that they can capitalize on the green economic investment opportunities, how they become not the makers of the problem, but part of the solution. How do we engage all of us and how we make it our responsibility? So for example, in Skopje, a very acute problem, air pollution. When we were doing studies, participation, the view of the citizens is that it's the industry to blame. We did the source apportionment study, which actually shows 40% comes from the heating, which means from the, you know, biomass that we are using in the heating. But nobody wants to, you know, assume the responsibility. The citizens are saying, you know, state companies should take care of that. But I think the message is that everybody needs to take their part of the responsibility and be part of the solution, not part of the problem. The second thing is looking into the future, not looking into the past. There are a lot of things going on in the society in which we look into the past. I think we should very much be looking into the future and very concretely into digital, into skills, and into the youth. Because without addressing these 3, you know, creating skills for the future, engaging youth in the political life, in the economic life to prevent the migration, there will be not much hope for, you know, anybody. And then the third one is addressing more issues at the local level. I think in the COVID specifically, it was so clear how much, you know, can be actually addressed by direct initiative at the local level. When it's crisis hitting you, if you don't have capacities at the local level, you are actually doomed because the national machinery cannot act that fast. So we have to increase the capacity, and this is where I see a very distinguished and important role of the CSOs, because they are working with the grassroots, they are working with the communities, they can very quickly support and, you know, raise awareness, engage people for the local solutions. So integration, future, looking into the future, digital skills and youth, and engagement at the local level are some of the things that UNDP is thinking about when we are designing interventions, but I think it's also very applicable to the CSOs. And last point that I want to make is the Reload program that was mentioned that UNDP is implementing with EU support is working on another important issue that will create the opportunity for the CSOs to engage, which is much more local financing coming. So not only from international organizations, not from EU, but actually coming from the local governments to support this type of local engagements and solutions at the local level, which are so critical and so needed, especially is in the fast changing and crisis-prone world that we are living in. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. It was perfect, I think, ending of this panel. Very good. And yeah, I think the comments you made were really complementary to everything that's been said. So I've added this also to my list, the complementary concepts of interconnectivity and also the local level, and also this importance of being able to distinguish between the urgent and the important, and somehow deal with that, which I think is a huge challenge for all of us, even in private life, I must say. So the purpose of this session was to set the scene for the next half day today and the half day tomorrow. I think we have achieved that very well, thanks to these excellent panelists online and here in the room. So thank you so much for that. I think we won't have time now for more debate, but I'm sure you will take all this with you into the lunch and continue to debate there. And we'll resume at 2 o'clock, please, sharp. So eat quickly and talk a lot, and then come back at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much for applause.